The dust cloud rising from the collapsed barn caught Kathryn Ellis's attention before she even rounded the bend in the dirt road, and her heart sank knowing that meant another setback she could not afford. It was July 1882 in Oatman, Arizona, and the merciless sun beat down on everything with a vengeance that seemed personal. She had been walking back from the general store, with supplies she had carefully rationed her meager funds to purchase, when she saw what remained of the small barn beside her late uncle's homestead. The structure had finally given way after months of neglect, and now a massive beam lay across the doorway where she kept her only milk cow and the 3 chickens that provided her eggs. Kathryn set down her canvas sack and approached the wreckage with growing dread. At 22 years old, she had been managing this property alone for nearly 6 months since Uncle Thomas passed, and every day brought a new challenge that tested her resolve. The beam was substantial, probably weighing more than she did, but she had no choice. Bessie the cow was making distressed sounds from inside, and she could hear the chickens squawking in panic. She bent down and wrapped her hands around the rough wood, feeling splinters immediately dig into her palms. With a grunt of effort, she pulled upward, her arms shaking with strain. The beam did not budge even slightly. She repositioned herself, planted her feet more firmly, and tried again. Her face flushed with exertion and her muscles screamed in protest, but the wood remained stubbornly in place. Sweat dripped into her eyes as she strained against the impossible weight. "That is not going to work, miss." The voice came from behind her, deep and calm. Kathryn released the beam and spun around, nearly losing her balance. A man sat astride a large roan horse, watching her with an expression that seemed more curious than judgmental. He was tall, that much was clear even mounted, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His hat was pulled low, but she could see dark eyes that assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. "I can manage," she said, hearing the defensiveness in her own voice and hating it. She was tired of feeling inadequate, tired of proving herself day after day. The man dismounted in one fluid motion and walked toward the collapsed barn, his spurs jingling with each step. He was probably in his late 20s, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble and dust, coating his worn leather vest. Without asking permission, he positioned himself beside the beam and wrapped his large hands around it. "On 3, he said, then lifted the massive piece of timber as though it weighed no more than a sack of flour. His muscles tensed beneath his shirt, and she could see the power in his frame as he hoisted the beam aside and set it down several feet away. He straightened and turned to face her, his expression neutral. "What else needs fixing?" Kathryn stared at him, momentarily speechless. Those 4 words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and the promise of help she desperately needed, but had been too proud to ask for. She opened her mouth to say she was fine, that she did not need charity, but the words caught in her throat as Bessie lowed pitifully from inside the collapsed structure. "The cow needs to get out," she admitted finally. "And the chickens. Then I suppose the whole barn needs rebuilding, but I do not have the funds for that right now." The cowboy nodded and stepped carefully over the debris. Kathryn followed, watching as he assessed the damage with the eye of someone who understood construction. He found where Bessie was trapped behind a fallen wall section and began methodically clearing the rubble. His movements were efficient and purposeful, wasting no energy. "I am Ximena Morrison," he said as he worked, not looking at her. "Been riding through on my way to the Silver Creek Ranch. Heard they are hiring hands for the season." "Kathryn Ellis," she replied, grabbing smaller pieces of wood and tossing them aside. "This was my uncle's place. It is mine now for what that is worth." Ximena pulled away a large board, and Bessie immediately pushed through the opening, mooing her displeasure at the whole ordeal. The cow trotted away from the wreckage, shaking her head. The chickens followed in a flurry of feathers and indignant clucking. "Place like this needs a lot of work," Ximena observed, surveying the property. Kathryn followed his gaze and saw it through his eyes. The sagging fence posts, the peeling paint on the small house, the garden that was struggling despite her best efforts. "You managing it alone?" "I am," she said, lifting her chin. "I have been doing just fine." Ximena's mouth quirked slightly, not quite a smile but close. "If you say so. But that barn is not going to rebuild itself, and you have got a fence that looks about ready to fall over in the next strong wind." "When did you last check the well?" Kathryn felt heat rise to her cheeks, and it had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. "I check the well regularly, thank you, and I am aware of what needs to be done. I simply have not had the time or resources to do everything at once." He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Not trying to offend you, Miss Ellis, just making observations. How about this? I will help you get the barn stable enough for your animals tonight, and tomorrow I will ride on to Silver Creek." "I cannot pay you," she said quickly. "I can offer you supper and a place to sleep in the house, but I do not have money for labor." "Did I ask for money?" Ximena walked back to his horse and began untying a rope from his saddle. "Supper sounds good. I have been eating trail rations for the past week." Kathryn wanted to argue, wanted to send him away and prove she could handle everything herself, but practicality won out over pride. She needed help, and here was someone offering it without strings attached. "All right," she agreed. "Thank you." They worked through the afternoon, and Kathryn found herself impressed by Ximena's knowledge and skill. He showed her how to assess which parts of the structure could be salvaged and which needed to be completely replaced. He explained how to brace the remaining walls temporarily so they would not collapse further. His hands moved with confidence, and she noticed he was careful to explain what he was doing rather than simply taking over. "Hand me that cross beam," he said, pointing. Kathryn lifted it and passed it up to where he stood on the partial wall. "Now watch how I set this. You want the weight distributed evenly, otherwise the whole thing will just come down again first chance it gets." "Where did you learn all this?" she asked. "My father was a carpenter back in Texas before he decided ranching would be more profitable. It was not, but I learned plenty about building before he figured that out." He secured the beam with practiced movements. "What about you? How did you end up out here?" "My parents died when I was 16. Fever took them both within a week of each other back in Missouri. Uncle Thomas was my only family, so I came to live with him. He taught me how to manage the property, but he was already sick when I arrived. His heart was failing. He held on for 6 years, but this past January he just did not wake up one morning." Kathryn was surprised by how easily the words came. She had not talked about her situation with anyone in town. Most people either pitied her or thought she should sell the property and move somewhere more suitable for a woman alone. She had grown used to keeping her struggles private. Ximena climbed down and stood beside her, studying their work. 6 years is a long time to watch someone fade. "I am sorry you went through that. It is life," she said, trying to sound matter-of-fact. "People die, you keep going." "They do," he agreed, "but it still leaves a mark." They finished securing a temporary shelter for the animals just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Kathryn showed Ximena where he could wash up at the pump behind the house while she went inside to prepare supper. The house was small but well kept, just 2 rooms and a kitchen area. She had done her best to maintain it, keeping everything clean and organized even when she felt overwhelmed by the outdoor tasks. She pulled out the salt pork and beans she had planned for her own meal and added more to the pot, along with some dried peppers and the last of her cornmeal for bread. Ximena came inside as she was setting the table, his hair damp from washing and his hat in his hands. He looked around the space with approval. "You keep a nice home, Miss Ellis." "Kathryn," she corrected. "If you are going to work on my property, we can dispense with the formalities." "Kathryn," he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. "Then you should call me Ximena." "Only my mother calls me Mr. Morrison, and usually only when she is angry with me." She smiled despite herself. "Is she angry with you often?" "More than I would like," he admitted, settling into one of the chairs. "She had hopes I would settle down and give her grandchildren by now. Instead, I keep drifting from ranch to ranch, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots." Kathryn brought the food to the table and sat across from him. "Why is that? The drifting, I mean." Ximena was quiet for a moment, spooning beans onto his plate. "I suppose I have been looking for something. Never quite knew what, just knew I had not found it yet. Figured I would recognize it when I saw it." They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Kathryn found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. There was something solid about Ximena Morrison, something dependable in the way he moved and spoke. He was not flashy or particularly talkative, but there was a quiet strength that she found appealing. "This is good," he said, gesturing to his plate. "Much better than anything I could make on the trail." "It is simple fare," she replied, "but I do my best with what I have." "That seems to be your approach to everything," Ximena observed, "doing your best with what you have." After supper, Kathryn showed him where he could spread his bedroll in the front room. She retreated to her small bedroom, but sleep did not come easily. She found herself thinking about the cowboy in the next room, wondering about his life and his travels. It had been so long since she had anyone to talk to, anyone who treated her as capable rather than fragile. Morning came early, as it always did on a working ranch. Kathryn woke to find Ximena already outside, checking on the animals and examining the temporary repairs they had made the previous evening. She made coffee and brought him a cup. "I have been thinking," he said, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. "That job at Silver Creek can wait a few days. This barn needs more work than we can do in an afternoon, and you have got other repairs that should not wait. Ximena, I told you I cannot pay you." "I know what you told me." He sipped his coffee, looking out over the property as the sun rose. "But seems to me you need help, and I have time to give it. Consider it repayment for the food and hospitality." "A few meals are not worth several days of labor," Kathryn protested. "How about this?" he said, turning to face her. "I help you get this place in working order, and you teach me how to cook something other than beans and coffee." "Deal," she laughed, surprised by the offer. "You want cooking lessons in exchange for rebuilding my barn, and fixing your fence and checking that well, and whatever else needs doing," he confirmed. "I am tired of my own cooking, and if I am going to keep drifting, I should probably learn to make something that does not taste like leather." Kathryn studied his face, looking for signs of pity or condescension, but found only genuine interest. "All right," she agreed, "but I am not a fancy cook, just simple, practical food." "That is exactly what I need," Ximena said. Over the next week they fell into a routine. Mornings were spent on the heavy work, rebuilding the barn, replacing fence posts, reinforcing the well housing. Ximena worked with steady determination, and Kathryn helped where she could, learning techniques that would serve her well after he left. Because he would leave, she reminded herself. He had said as much. He was a drifter, and drifters did not stay. Afternoons, when the heat became unbearable, they would retreat to the shade. Kathryn would show him how to prepare various dishes, laughing at his initial clumsy attempts to knead bread dough or season a stew properly. He was a quick learner, though, and surprisingly patient with the detailed work. "You have to feel the dough," she explained one day, guiding his large hands through the motion. "If it is too sticky, you add more flour. Too dry, a bit more water. It is not about measuring exactly. It is about understanding what you are working with." His hand stilled under hers, and she became suddenly aware of how close they were standing. She could smell the clean scent of soap and honest sweat, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. When she looked up, his dark eyes were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Like this?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "Yes," she managed. "Exactly like that." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, before Ximena stepped back and returned to kneading the dough with renewed focus. Kathryn turned away, her heart beating faster than the situation warranted. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk. Ximena told her about the places he had been, the ranches where he had worked, the vast stretches of territory he had crossed. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, the dreams she had harbored before her parents died, the way she had learned to adjust her expectations to match her reality. "Do you ever regret staying?" he asked one night. "You could have sold this place after your uncle died, started fresh somewhere else." Kathryn considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted. "When I am struggling to lift something too heavy, or when the loneliness feels like it might swallow me whole. But this is mine, you know, the first thing I have ever owned. My parents had nothing to leave me, and Uncle Thomas worked his whole life for this patch of desert. Giving it up would feel like failing them both." "It would not be failure," Ximena said gently. "It would be choosing a different path." "Maybe," she allowed, "but I am not ready to make that choice yet. I keep thinking if I can just get through this season, just make it to the next one, things will get easier." "And will they?" She smiled wryly. "Probably not, but hope is a powerful thing." By the second week, the barn was nearly complete. Ximena had reinforced the structure and replaced all the damaged sections with wood they salvaged from other parts of the property. The fence posts were solid, the well housing was secure, and he had even repaired the sagging porch steps that Kathryn had been carefully avoiding for months. "You have done too much," she said, surveying the improvements. "This is far beyond a fair exchange for a few cooking lessons." "I had time to spare," he replied, but there was something in his voice that suggested time was not the real reason he had stayed. That night, Kathryn made a special supper to celebrate the completed work. She used the last of her saved eggs and the vegetables from her garden that had finally started producing. They ate by lamplight, and the conversation flowed easily as it had grown to do over their days together. "So tomorrow you will head to Silver Creek?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Ximena set down his fork. "I suppose I should. The work here is mostly done, and I did tell them I would be arriving around this time." "Of course," Kathryn said. "You have your own life to live." "I am grateful for everything you have done here." "Kathryn," he began, then paused. "I have been thinking about what we talked about the other night, about drifting and looking for something." She waited, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I think maybe I have been going about it wrong," he continued. "Thinking I would find what I was looking for out there somewhere in the next town or the next job. But what if it has been right here all along?" Her heart leaped, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What are you saying?" Ximena reached across the table and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle but firm. "I am saying I do not want to leave. I am saying these past 2 weeks have been the most content I have felt in years. I am saying I think I could be happy here if you would want me to stay." "Ximena," she whispered, her eyes stinging with sudden tears, "I cannot ask you to give up your life for me. You are not asking, I am offering. He squeezed her hand. I know this is sudden. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I have never felt this way before, like I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Like I found what I was looking for. Kathryn blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the rush of emotions. She had been alone for so long, had convinced herself she did not need anyone else. But these past weeks had shown her what life could be like with a partner, someone who worked beside her rather than trying to take over or protect her from herself. I would want you to stay, she said softly. I would want that very much. Ximena stood and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. Kathryn melted into the embrace, feeling safe and valued in a way she had not experienced since her parents died. He held her like she was precious, like she was exactly where he wanted her to be. I need you to be sure, she said against his chest. This is a hard life. The property barely makes enough to support one person, let alone two. There will be difficult times ahead. I am sure, he replied. I have been living hand to mouth for years, moving from place to place. At least here I would be building something that matters, with someone who matters to me. She pulled back enough to look up at his face. In the lamplight, his features were softer, more open than she had seen them. This matters to me too, she said. You matter to me. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and questioning. Kathryn kissed him back, pouring into it all the loneliness and hope and gratitude she felt. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. I should probably court you properly, Ximena said with a slight smile. Take you to town, let people see us together. Make sure everyone knows my intentions are honorable. Are they? She teased. Honorable, completely, he assured her. I intend to marry you, Kathryn Ellis, if you will have me. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon, when you are ready. I am ready now, she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I do not need a long courtship or a fancy wedding. I just need you here, building a life with me. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Oatman. The ceremony was simple, attended by a handful of townspeople who had gotten to know Kathryn over the past year. She wore her best dress, carefully mended and pressed, and carried wildflowers that Ximena had picked that morning from the desert hills. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ximena kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. Kathryn felt like she was floating, unable to quite believe that this strong, capable man had chosen her and her difficult life over the freedom of the open trail. They returned to the ranch, which now felt less like a burden and more like a home. Ximena proved to be an excellent partner, taking on the heavy work while respecting Kathryn's knowledge and experience. He never made her feel incapable or weak, but instead found ways to make her stronger. With 2 people working the property, improvements came quickly. They expanded the garden, added more chickens, and even managed to purchase a second cow. Ximena took a job at a neighboring ranch 3 days a week, bringing in much-needed cash while still maintaining their own place. Kathryn continued to manage the household and tend the animals, finding joy in the work now that she was not facing it alone. One evening in late autumn, about 4 months after their wedding, Kathryn stood at the stove preparing supper when a wave of nausea hit her. She gripped the counter, breathing deeply until it passed. Ximena noticed immediately, crossing the room in 3 long strides. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hand on her back. "I am fine," she said, though her face was pale. "Just felt dizzy for a moment." "You have been tired lately," he observed. "Maybe you should see the doctor in town." Kathryn met his eyes and saw understanding dawning in them. "I do not think I need a doctor to tell me what I already suspect," she said quietly, his face transformed, joy and wonder mixing with concern. "You think you are pregnant?" "I am fairly certain," she confirmed. I missed my monthly courses and this nausea has been happening every morning for the past week. Ximena pulled her into his arms, holding her close. A baby, he murmured. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy? She asked, needing to hear the words. Happy does not begin to cover it, he said, pulling back to look at her. Kathryn, I never thought I would have this. A home, a wife, a family. I thought I would just keep drifting forever. I am glad you stopped drifting, she said, touching his face. So am I. Every single day I am grateful I decided to help a stubborn woman lift a beam she had no business trying to move alone. She laughed. I could have managed eventually. Sure you could have, he agreed, kissing her forehead, but I am glad you did not have to. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Ximena became even more protective, though he tried not to be overbearing about it. He took on more of the physical work and insisted Kathryn rest more often. She protested at first, not wanting to be treated like an invalid, but eventually accepted his care as the expression of love that it was. Winter came, milder than in Missouri but still cold enough to require fires and extra blankets. They spent the evenings planning for the baby, talking about names and dreams for the future. Ximena built a cradle from wood he carefully selected and sanded smooth, working on it every evening until it was perfect. What if I am not a good father? He asked one night, running his hand over the cradle's curved edge. What if I am not a good mother? Kathryn countered. We will figure it out together the way we have figured out everything else. You will be an excellent mother, he said with certainty. You are patient and kind and strong. Our child will be lucky to have you. Our child will be lucky to have both of us, she corrected. In March of 1883, on a night when the desert wind howled outside, Kathryn went into labor. Ximena rode to town and brought back the midwife, then spent the next 12 hours pacing the floor and trying not to panic at every sound from the bedroom. When the baby's cry finally pierced the air, he nearly collapsed with relief. The midwife emerged with a smile. You have a son, Mr. Morrison, strong and healthy. Ximena entered the bedroom to find Kathryn propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft cloth. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. Ximena, meet your son, she said softly. He approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe too hard near the fragile new life. The baby was small and red-faced, with a surprising amount of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. When Ximena carefully touched one of those fists, the baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. He is perfect, Ximena whispered, awestruck. We should name him, Kathryn said. I was thinking Thomas after my uncle. Thomas Morrison, Ximena tried out the name. I like it. Thomas Ximena Morrison. Hello, Thomas, Kathryn murmured to the baby. Welcome to your home. The early months of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming, but they navigated the challenges together. Thomas proved to be a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs, and both parents spent many sleepless nights walking him around the small house. But every smile, every small milestone, felt like a miracle to Ximena, who had never imagined he would have this kind of life. As Thomas grew, the ranch prospered. With Ximena's steady work and Kathryn's careful management, they slowly built up their resources. They added more livestock, improved the buildings, and even managed to save a little money. The community began to see them as a solid, respectable family rather than a struggling widow and a drifting cowboy. 2 years after Thomas was born, Kathryn found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and she was sick more often. Ximena worried constantly, but she reassured him that some pregnancies were just more difficult than others. I am fine, she insisted when he tried to make her rest for the 3rd time in one afternoon. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I can manage." "You always say you can manage," he pointed out, "even when you cannot." "And you always worry too much," she countered, "even when there is nothing to worry about." Despite her reassurances, Ximena could not shake his concern. He hired a woman from town to come help with the housework and with watching Thomas over Kathryn's protests. But even she had to admit it was nice to have the extra help, especially as she grew larger and more uncomfortable. Their daughter was born in December of 1885, arriving 3 weeks early during a cold snap that had everyone huddled near fires. The labor was faster than with Thomas but more intense, and when it was over, Kathryn was pale and shaking with exhaustion, but the baby was perfect. Small but healthy, with Kathryn's dark hair and Ximena's eyes. They named her Clara, after Ximena's mother, who had passed away the previous year without ever meeting her grandchildren. Thomas, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, watching her sleep and reporting every movement to his parents. "Baby, move her hand," he would announce. "Baby, open eyes." Ximena watched his children with a sense of wonder that never faded. Sometimes he would wake in the night and have to check that it was all real, that he truly had this life. Kathryn would wake too, sensing his restlessness, and pull him close. "Second thoughts about settling down?" she would tease gently. "Never," he would reply. "Just making sure I am not dreaming." As the years passed, the Morrison family became an integral part of the Oatman community. Ximena served on the town council and helped organize the construction of a new school. Kathryn started a small business selling eggs and vegetables to the other families, bringing in extra income that helped secure their future. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with his father on the ranch. Clara was more spirited, always getting into mischief and asking questions about everything. Together, they filled the small house with noise and energy and love. When Thomas was 6 and Clara 4, Kathryn discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier than either of the previous 2. She felt strong and healthy throughout, and Ximena finally relaxed enough to enjoy the anticipation rather than spending 9 months worrying. Their second son was born in the summer of 1889, arriving just after dawn on a morning so beautiful it seemed like a blessing. They named him William, and from the start, he was the easiest of their children. He rarely cried, ate well, and slept through the night within weeks. "We finally figured out how to do this," Ximena joked, holding the sleeping infant. "Or we just got lucky this time," Kathryn replied, though she was grateful for the easier baby. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They expanded their herd of cattle and built a larger barn to accommodate the livestock. Ximena hired occasional help during busy seasons, providing work for younger men in the community the way he had once needed work himself. One evening, when Thomas was 10, Clara 8, and William 4, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their tradition, this quiet time together at the end of each day. The children were finally still after a day of running and playing, and Kathryn sat beside Ximena, her hand in his. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had ridden past that day?" she asked quietly, so the children would not hear. "If you had decided my collapsed barn was not your problem," Ximena squeezed her hand. "All the time," he admitted. "And every time I think about it, I thank whatever force in the universe made me stop. That was the day my real life began." "Mine too," Kathryn said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Everything before that was just surviving. This is living." "Papa, tell us the story again," Clara demanded, having overheard, despite their quiet voices, "about how you met Mama." It had become one of their favorite tales, the story of how their parents came together. Ximena glanced at Kathryn, who smiled and nodded. "Well," Ximena began, "I was riding through on my way to another job like I had done 100 times before. I did not plan to stop. But then I saw a woman trying to lift a beam that probably weighed twice what she did. Because the barn fell down," Thomas interjected, knowing the story by heart. "That is right. The barn had collapsed and your mother was trying to save her animals all by herself. So I stopped and I lifted that beam and then I asked her what else needed fixing." "And Mama said everything," Clara added with a giggle. "Not everything," Kathryn corrected with mock indignation. "Just a few things." "And Papa stayed and stayed and stayed," William said, his young voice serious, "because he loved Mama." "That is right, son," Ximena confirmed, meeting Kathryn's eyes over the children's heads. "I stayed because I fell in love with your mother and with this place and with the life we could build together." "And now we are all here," Clara said happily. "And now we are all here," Ximena agreed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Ximena reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought of all the ranches he had worked, all the towns he had passed through, all the years spent searching for something he could not name. And he thought of that July day in 1882, when he had seen a determined woman struggling with an impossible task and decided to help. That single choice, that moment of stopping instead of riding past, had changed everything. It had given him a home, a family, a purpose beyond the next job or the next horizon. It had shown him that what he had been searching for all along was not a place but a person, not adventure but belonging. Kathryn had given him all of that and more. She had taken a drifting cowboy and shown him how to be a husband, a father, a man with roots deep in the red Arizona soil. In return, he had tried every day to be worthy of that gift, to show her through actions and words that choosing him had been the right decision. Their life was not always easy. The desert was harsh, money was often tight, and there were struggles and setbacks along the way. But they faced everything together as partners in every sense of the word. What Kathryn could not do, Ximena did. What Ximena did not know, Kathryn taught him. They balanced each other, complemented each other, and loved each other more with each passing year. The years continued to roll by, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children. Thomas proved to have his father's skill with building and his mother's head for business. By the time he was 14, he was managing parts of the ranch operation himself and talking about expanding into horse breeding. Clara inherited her mother's determination and her father's wanderlust, a combination that led to many adventures and occasional trouble. She was the one who convinced her brothers to explore the old mining tunnels near town, the one who brought home injured animals to nurse back to health, the one who questioned everything and accepted nothing at face value. William was the peacemaker, the one who could smooth over any argument and find compromise where others saw only conflict. He was content to work in the garden with his mother, helping her expand the vegetable business that now supplied several families in town. When Thomas turned 16, he approached his parents with a proposal. He wanted to start breeding horses, using a corner of their property to build facilities for training and selling quality mounts. He had researched the market, talked to other breeders, and put together a detailed plan. Ximena and Kathryn listened to his presentation, impressed by his thoroughness and vision. They discussed it privately that night, lying in bed in the room they had shared for over a decade. "He is ready for this," Kathryn said. "He has the knowledge and the drive." "I know," Ximena agreed. "But it is hard to watch them grow up. Seems like just yesterday he was a baby in that cradle I built." "They all grow up," Kathryn reminded him gently. That is what we raised them to do, to be capable and independent. Like their mother, Ximena said, pulling her close. Like both their parents, she corrected. They approved Thomas's proposal, and the horse breeding operation became a successful addition to the ranch. Within 2 years, Morrison horses were known throughout the territory for their quality and temperament. Clara, at 15, announced that she wanted to be a teacher. She had been helping at the town school, working with younger children, and discovered she loved it. Ximena and Kathryn supported her dream, saving money to send her to the teaching college in Phoenix for training. William, at 12, was still finding his way, but he showed promise in everything he tried. He had his father's patience and his mother's resilience, and both parents knew he would find his path in his own time. One spring evening in 1896, as Ximena and Kathryn sat on their porch watching another sunset, they reflected on the 14 years since that day with the fallen beam. "We built something good here," Kathryn said softly. "We did," Ximena agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." "Do you ever miss it? The drifting, the freedom of the trail?" Ximena was quiet for a moment, considering the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "Just me and my horse and the open sky, but I would not trade this for anything. This is where I belong. With you and our children and this piece of desert we have made into a home." "I love you," Kathryn said, the words still carrying weight after all these years. "I love you too," Ximena replied. "Every day more than the day before." As they sat together, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors, Ximena thought about that long-ago question he had asked. What else needs fixing? At the time, he had been talking about physical repairs, about beams and fences and buildings. But over the years, he had come to understand that question had been about so much more. They had both needed fixing in their own ways. Kathryn, broken by loss and struggling under the weight of solitary responsibility. Ximena, adrift and searching for something to anchor him. They had fixed each other, not by changing who they were, but by giving each other a safe place to be fully themselves. The ranch had needed fixing too, and they had done that together, transforming it from a struggling homestead into a thriving operation. But more than that, they had built a family, created a legacy that would extend beyond their own lives through their children and eventually their grandchildren. Years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. Clara went off to teacher's college and returned with a teaching certificate and a fiancé, a young lawyer named Daniel who treated her like she hung the moon. They were married in 1899, in the same church where Ximena and Kathryn had married 17 years earlier. Thomas married in 1901, choosing a practical young woman named Sarah who shared his passion for horses. They built a house on the far corner of the Morrison property and started their own family, giving Ximena and Kathryn their first grandchildren. William, true to his peacemaking nature, became involved in territorial politics, working to help Arizona gain statehood. He traveled frequently but always came home to the ranch, saying it was the only place he could think clearly through it all. Ximena and Kathryn remained each other's constant. They worked side by side, weathered hardships together, celebrated victories as a team. Their love, which had begun with a fallen beam and a simple question, had grown and deepened into something unshakable. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1902, Ximena took Kathryn back to the spot where the old barn had stood. They had rebuilt it long ago, making it larger and stronger, but he still remembered exactly where that beam had lain across the doorway. "Right here," he said, pointing. "This is where I first saw you struggling to do the impossible all by yourself." "I was quite a sight, I am sure," Kathryn said with a laugh, "covered in dust and sweat and far too stubborn to ask for help. "You were beautiful," Ximena said seriously. "Strong and determined and beautiful. I knew right then that you were someone special." "You did not," she protested. "You thought I was foolish for trying to lift something so heavy." "I thought you were brave," he corrected. "And I wanted to know more about the woman who would not give up even when facing impossible odds." Kathryn leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her as he had done countless times over the past 2 decades. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For stopping that day. For asking what else needed fixing. For staying and building this life with me. For everything." "Thank you for letting me stay," Ximena replied. "For taking a chance on a drifting cowboy who did not know what he was looking for until he found it." They stood together in the place where their story began, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built. The strong barn, the thriving ranch, the home full of love and family. It had all started with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy seeing someone in need and deciding to help. That decision had changed both their lives in ways neither could have predicted. It had given Kathryn a partner who saw her strength rather than her struggles. It had given Ximena the home and purpose he had been searching for across countless miles of territory. Together, they had created something that would last long after they were gone, a legacy of love and hard work and determination. As the Arizona sun set once again over their land, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson and purple, Ximena and Kathryn walked hand in hand back to the house. Their children and grandchildren would be arriving soon for the anniversary dinner, filling the home with noise and laughter and life. It was, Ximena thought, exactly the kind of life worth living. The kind of life worth every mile he had traveled to find it. The kind of life that started with a fallen beam, a simple question, and a woman brave enough to say yes when a stranger offered to help. Behind them, the barn stood strong against the evening sky, a testament to what could be built when 2 people worked together toward a common goal. And inside the house, the cradle Ximena had crafted so carefully for their first child now rocked a new generation. His grandson sleeping peacefully in the same place his father had slept 20 years before. The story that had begun with "What else needs fixing?" had found its answer in the life they built together. Everything that needed fixing had been fixed, not with hammers and nails alone, but with love and partnership, and the unwavering commitment to face every challenge side by side. And in the end, that was the greatest repair of all, the one that mattered most. 2 broken people had found each other, and, in the process of building a ranch and raising a family, had built something even more precious. A love that would last a lifetime and beyond, echoing through the generations that would follow, a reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop and ask if someone needs help, because you never know where that simple question might lead.